On what seemed like just another quiet evening at a New York restaurant, a shy waitress walked over to the table of the city's most feared Mafia boss. But instead of speaking, she stunned everyone by greeting his elderly mother in perfect sign language. The entire room froze in shock. No one could have guessed that this simple gesture would uncover hidden truths and change the course of that night forever. Before you begin, click subscribe and tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today? Emily had been working at Harper's diner for almost 2 years. It was a quiet place most of the time, with regular customers and the same daily routine. She liked the calmness, but on that particular evening, things felt a little different. 3 men came in together and sat at a corner table. They didn't order anything right away. Instead, they kept their heads down, whispering to each other and glancing around the room. Emily noticed them because they didn't look like the usual crowd. Their eyes moved too much, and their hands were always hidden under the table. She felt nervous, but tried to act normal as she cleaned nearby tables. When she got close enough to hear a few words, her heart started beating faster. One of them mentioned a name she had heard on the news: Anthony Romano. They were talking about him arriving soon. They were planning something bad. Anthony Romano was not just any customer. He was a powerful man, known around the city for his reputation. People said he was involved with dangerous businesses. When he entered the restaurant, everything changed. The atmosphere got quiet. Even the kitchen staff stopped what they were doing to peek at him. He walked in wearing a long, dark coat and expensive shoes. But what caught everyone's attention was who was with him: his elderly mother. She looked very old and needed help to walk, holding his arm for support. Emily noticed right away that she seemed disconnected from everything happening around her. That's when she remembered a story she had heard a long time ago, that Anthony's mother was deaf. It wasn't something most people knew. The 3 men in the corner seemed tense now. They kept looking at each other and at Anthony's table, like they were waiting for something specific to happen. Emily wanted to stay away from the situation, but her job forced her to get closer. She had to go to Anthony's table to take their order. As she walked over, she tried to act natural. When she got there, Anthony was helping his mother sit down. The old woman looked up at Emily, smiling kindly. Without thinking too much, Emily used the basic sign language she had learned back in high school to say hello. It was a simple sign, just a greeting, but it had a strange effect. Anthony's mother looked surprised, then delighted. She signed something back slowly and clearly. Emily responded again, using the little she remembered. Around them, people froze. Even Anthony stared at her, not angry, but surprised. The 3 men in the corner also noticed. They stopped whispering and sat up straight. Something about Emily's signing had changed the mood completely. No one expected her to know how to do that. The reason the signing mattered so much was because of what was supposed to happen. The 3 men had a plan. They were waiting for the right moment to act, and that moment was going to be during a special toast. Anthony usually raised a glass with his mother when they dined together, something respectful and symbolic. It was during that toast the assassins had planned to strike. But Emily, without knowing, had interrupted the flow. Because of her sign language greeting, Anthony's mother started a conversation. That meant the toast didn't happen on time. The delay made the 3 men nervous. They looked at each other, unsure if they should wait or move forward. One of them even stood up slightly, then sat back down when he saw Anthony still signing with Emily's help. What was meant to be a fast, clean attack suddenly became uncertain. The timing was ruined, and their plan was falling apart. Emily didn't understand what she had done. She thought she was just being kind, but after a few minutes, she noticed how strange everything felt. Anthony's guards, standing near the entrance, looked alert. They whispered into their radios. Anthony himself leaned closer to his mother, trying to figure out if something was wrong. He glanced at Emily again, more curious now than surprised. The three men in the corner were clearly panicking. One of them got up and went to the bathroom, maybe to make a call. Another pretended to check his phone but kept watching the door. Emily felt pressure growing all around her. Her small action had set off a chain reaction, but she had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. All she knew was that something serious was going on, and people were watching her now. She couldn't leave the floor, so she kept serving like nothing had happened. When the tension reached its peak, one of Anthony's men approached the table in the corner. He asked the men to follow him outside. At first they resisted, but then they stood up slowly. The entire restaurant watched as they walked out with the guard. No one said anything. Anthony, still seated with his mother, nodded slightly in Emily's direction. It wasn't a big gesture, but it meant something. Emily stood there, frozen for a second. She realized that her small knowledge of sign language, something she never thought she would use, had changed the course of that night. The danger had passed, at least for now. Anthony's mother smiled again and signed a thank you. Emily responded with a nervous smile. As the situation returned to normal, she went back to her duties. No one talked about what had happened, but Emily knew her life had just taken a new direction. And it all started with one unexpected sign. Anthony could sense something was not right. He was a man who had lived his life surrounded by danger, and he had learned to recognize when the atmosphere shifted. Sitting at his table with his mother, he noticed his men moving closer, scanning the room, their hands near their jackets where weapons were hidden. The restaurant looked normal to most people, but to Anthony, every detail stood out. Emily, the young waitress, tried to stay calm as she moved between tables, carrying trays and refilling glasses. She was careful not to look nervous, but her mind was racing. She felt that the strange men who had been watching earlier were part of something dangerous, even though she couldn't prove it. Anthony's guards gave her quick glances too, as if they were trying to decide if she had played some role in the sudden tension inside Harper's diner. Outside the restaurant, three men stood near the parked cars, trying to stay hidden from view. Vincent, Joey, and Sal were angry. Their plan had seemed simple enough: wait for Anthony Romano to raise a glass in his usual toast, then strike when everyone's attention shifted. But the toast never happened. Instead, the unexpected use of sign language by the waitress changed everything. Anthony's mother became the focus, and the moment slipped away. Now the men were arguing, each blaming the other for hesitating. Vincent, the oldest of the group, insisted that it wasn't their fault. He said the girl had ruined everything by distracting Anthony and his mother. Joey was restless, kicking at the gravel, while Sal kept pacing, swearing that they had lost their chance. Their frustration was building, and soon their anger turned into a new plan. Emily would now become the tool they could use. The three men started to discuss what to do next. They could not afford another failure, not when Anthony's life was their target. Sal suggested they go back in and grab Emily immediately, but Vincent shook his head. That was too risky, with Anthony's guards standing at every corner. Instead, Vincent said they should wait and strike later, when Emily was alone. She had shown that she mattered, even without realizing it. By stopping the toast, she had interrupted their timing, which made her important now. Joey agreed, saying that if they scared her, maybe she would lead them to a chance to reach Anthony. They decided Emily was no longer just a waitress. She was the weak point. They didn't care if she was innocent or not. To them, she was the reason they had failed. They leaned against the wall outside the diner, pulling out their phones, ready to set their plan in motion. Inside the diner, Emily continued to work, collecting plates and trying to keep her focus on simple tasks. But she felt the weight of eyes on her, not just from Anthony's guards, but also from customers who had noticed the strange tension earlier. She did not want to appear suspicious, so she kept smiling politely, asking if anyone wanted coffee or dessert. Yet her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. She told herself it was just nerves, that everything would return to normal. But deep down, she knew something bigger was happening, something dangerous. She replayed in her head the moment she signed to Anthony's mother. It had felt harmless, even kind, but it had clearly triggered a chain of events. Now she felt like she had become part of something she didn't understand, trapped in a game between powerful men she had never wanted to meet. As Emily carried a stack of dirty plates toward the kitchen, she felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. At first, she thought it might be her manager or a friend checking in. She wiped her hands quickly and pulled the phone out, hiding it behind the tray so no one could see. The message on the screen made her freeze. It read, "We know who you are. This isn't over." Her stomach turned cold. She put the phone down on the counter, trying not to panic. A second message came almost immediately. "You ruined everything. You'll pay for it." Emily's heart raced. She looked around, but no one seemed to notice. She wondered how these people got her number, how they even knew her name. She wanted to tell someone, maybe Anthony's guards, but fear kept her quiet. If she spoke, she could put herself in even more danger. Another vibration shook her phone, and she forced herself to look again. The third message was worse. "You are the key to him. We will find you." Her breath caught in her throat. Emily realized she wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had become a target. The room around her felt smaller, the air heavier. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and forced herself to return to the dining area, carrying the plates as if nothing was wrong. She smiled at customers, nodded to co-workers, but her hands felt weak. Across the room, Anthony's eyes briefly met hers. She quickly looked away, afraid he might see the fear on her face. She had no idea that outside, Vincent, Joey, and Sal were already planning their next move. For them, the night wasn't a failure. It was the beginning. And for Emily, the threatening messages were only the start of a deadly game. It was late at night, and the restaurant was almost empty. Most of the customers had already left, and only a few tables still had people finishing their meals. The lights were dimmer, and the noise had faded. Emily was tired but relieved the day was ending. Anthony Romano was still sitting at his usual table near the back wall. His elderly mother was sitting next to him, sipping tea slowly. Around them, 3 of Anthony's guards stood watch, keeping their eyes on the entrance and windows. Emily stayed near the counter, trying to balance the cash register and prepare the receipts before closing. She wanted to finish fast and go home. The night had already been stressful. As she counted the bills, she glanced one last time at Anthony's table. Nothing seemed strange until a loud crash broke through the silence. Glass shattered. Gunshots exploded through the front windows of Harper's diner. Everything happened in seconds. The sound of breaking glass was followed by rapid gunfire. The bullets came from outside and hit several parts of the restaurant. Windows, walls, chairs. Emily dropped behind the counter, covering her head. Screams echoed. Plates fell and shattered. The few remaining customers ran toward the back, looking for safety. Anthony's guards reacted immediately. 2 of them pulled out guns and returned fire, while the third shielded Anthony's mother with his body. Anthony stayed calm. He stood up slowly and gave orders with short, clear words. Emily tried to crawl away from the counter, but she couldn't move far. Her hands were shaking and her ears were ringing. She saw one of the shooters outside the broken window. It was Joey. He was yelling something. Then she heard it. "Bring out the girl!" They weren't just attacking Anthony. They had come back for her. She was now the bait. Anthony didn't wait. He walked quickly to where Emily was hiding behind a broken table. His movements were focused, without panic. He crouched beside her and told her they had to move. Emily nodded, too afraid to speak. One of his men joined them and gave a quick update. The attackers were trying to get inside. Anthony pointed toward the back hallway and led Emily and his mother in that direction. He opened a heavy door near the kitchen, revealing stairs that led underground. Emily had never seen it before. She followed without question. Down below, the space was dark and narrow. It was an old storage area, full of wine racks and dusty boxes. Anthony grabbed a flashlight from the wall and opened another hidden door inside the cellar. Behind it was a small tunnel, damp and cold. "City maintenance tunnels," he said. "They've been here for decades." Emily stepped inside, heart still racing. The tunnel smelled like old water and rust. The floor was wet, and the walls were made of old concrete bricks. Pipes ran along the ceiling. The space was just wide enough for one person at a time. Emily walked behind Anthony, who carried the flashlight. His mother followed, holding onto his coat with one hand. The sound of footsteps and distant shouting could still be heard from above. The attackers were probably inside the diner now, but they didn't know about the tunnel. Anthony moved quickly, but carefully. He knew the layout and turned corners without hesitation. Emily struggled to keep up, but didn't stop. Her legs hurt, and her mind kept flashing back to the sound of gunfire. She didn't know where the tunnel would lead, and she didn't care. Right now, staying with Anthony was the only way to survive. He didn't say much, just gave quiet instructions as they continued walking. After several minutes in the tunnel, they reached a locked gate. Anthony pulled out a key and opened it. On the other side, the tunnel connected to an old maintenance room. It looked abandoned, with broken chairs and dusty equipment. He helped his mother sit down, then turned to Emily. "You're safe here for now," he said. Emily was still shaking. She leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Why me?" she asked. Anthony looked at her for a long moment. "Because you stopped them once. That made you part of this." Emily felt a mix of fear and confusion. She never wanted any of this. She had only used sign language to be polite, not to start a war. Now everything was different. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She had seen too much. Anthony's men were still fighting above, but here, underground, a different battle had already begun, one that involved choices and consequences. Anthony checked his phone and gave new instructions to one of his guards who had joined them. Then he turned back to Emily. "From now on, you're under my protection," he said. Emily didn't know how to respond. She was thankful to be alive, but she also knew what being under his protection really meant. It wasn't just safety, it was a connection to his world. A world full of secrets, power, and danger. She was part of something she couldn't escape. Anthony stood beside his mother, who gently touched Emily's hand and smiled. Emily nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. She realized she hadn't just saved Anthony's life. He had saved hers too. But now, she was involved in a life that didn't offer easy exits. As the sound of sirens grew faint in the distance, Emily understood one thing clearly. Her life before that night was gone. Everything had changed at Harper's. 3 days had passed since the night of the shooting at Harper's diner. Emily opened her eyes slowly, not knowing where she was. The bed under her was soft, the room quiet and large. Curtains blocked most of the sunlight, and everything smelled clean. She sat up and looked around. The furniture was expensive, the walls covered with paintings. It didn't take long for her to realize she was no longer anywhere near her small apartment. A woman knocked gently on the door and told her Mr. Romano would speak with her soon. Emily got dressed in the clean clothes left for her and walked through a hallway, guarded by 2 silent men in black suits. The mansion was huge and surrounded by guards. When she reached the living room, Anthony Romano was waiting. He nodded, asked her to sit, and explained that she was now staying at his family's estate in Long Island. Emily listened carefully as Anthony spoke. His voice was calm, but direct. He told her that the danger had not passed. The men who attacked the diner were still out there, and they were planning something else. According to his sources, the next move would happen during a big event, the Belmont Hotel Charity Ball. It was a formal event, full of important people, and Anthony's enemies would likely try to strike again. This time, they would use the crowd to their advantage. Anthony then told her something that made her heart beat faster. She was going to be part of the plan. He wanted her to attend the event as bait. Emily froze. He explained that she would not be alone. His men would be there, hidden in the crowd, and she would wear security gear. But she would need to act normal, as if nothing was wrong. It was the only way. Emily didn't answer right away. Her mind was full of questions. She wanted to ask why it had to be her. Why couldn't he use someone else? But deep down, she already knew. Ever since she had signed to Anthony's mother, she had become part of something she couldn't leave. That small act connected her to the Romano family. The enemy had noticed her, and now they wouldn't forget her. Anthony reminded her that running away would not work. If she disappeared, they would find her anyway. He promised she would be protected, but she had to be brave. Emily sat there, feeling overwhelmed, but she nodded. She didn't have much of a choice. She was already inside the world she had once tried to avoid. Anthony said the preparations would begin tomorrow. She would be trained on how to use the security equipment and what to do if something went wrong during the event. The rest of the day passed slowly. Emily was shown around the estate but stayed close to her room. Everywhere she went, someone was watching. Some of the guards were polite, others silent, but all of them serious. She had her meals alone. At night, she sat on the bed thinking about everything. Her old life felt far away. Just a week ago, she was serving coffee and cleaning tables. Now, she was staying in a guarded mansion, being told she would be used in a trap. Part of her wanted to scream, but another part knew there was no going back. Anthony wasn't cruel to her. He treated her with a strange kind of respect, almost like she was family. But the truth was clear. She was being used for a purpose. She had value because of what she knew and what she had done, and that value came with risk. The next morning, a team of security experts arrived. They brought special devices for her to wear during the event. One was a tiny earpiece that would allow her to stay in contact with Anthony's team. Another was a panic button disguised as a ring. If she pressed it, help would come immediately. They also gave her a bracelet with a built-in GPS tracker. Everything was designed to keep her safe. The trainer explained how to use the items clearly, letting her practice until she got it right. Emily tried to focus. She asked questions, took notes, and repeated the steps again and again. It wasn't just about learning how to use the equipment. It was also about preparing her mind. If something happened during the event, she would need to stay calm. She realized that she wasn't just bait anymore. She was part of a plan, and plans in Anthony's world had consequences. As the day of the charity ball came closer, Emily began to feel the pressure. The mansion was busier now, with people coming in and out, preparing for what was to come. Anthony gave her a final briefing. He reminded her that they weren't looking for a fight. They wanted to catch the enemy in the act. Emily's job was to be present, act natural, and trust the team. She nodded again. She still felt fear, but it had changed. It wasn't the same fear she felt when hiding behind a table at the diner. It was a quiet, steady fear, mixed with determination. She had already survived one attack. Now she would help prevent another. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the dress chosen for the event. It looked elegant, but also allowed her to move easily. Looking at herself, she barely recognized the woman in the reflection. Her life had changed completely. The grand ballroom at the Belmont Hotel was brightly lit and filled with people wearing expensive suits and elegant dresses. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays of drinks and small plates. Music played from a live band near the stage. The guests included politicians, business owners, celebrities, and others who pretended to be respectable. But many of them had dark connections, criminals hiding behind polite smiles. At the center of the room, Anthony Romano arrived with his elderly mother on one arm and Emily on the other. Emily wore a long blue dress chosen by Anthony's staff. It was tasteful, but eye-catching. Her hair was styled, and she looked calm, even though she felt tense inside. As they walked in, many heads turned to look at them. Emily felt the weight of every stare. She understood this night was important. Everyone here was watching, and some were waiting for the right moment to strike. Scar and his men arrived later, blending into the crowd without drawing attention. They dressed like guests, but their eyes scanned the room with purpose. Scar was known for being cold and efficient. He walked confidently, nodding to people who didn't know who he really was. His associates, including Vincent, Joey, and Sal, entered one by one. They split up, positioning themselves near exits, staircases, and balconies. No one noticed anything strange. They had done this kind of thing before. Their plan was simple: wait for Emily to be alone, isolate her, and take her quietly. They believed that Anthony had let his guard down, bringing her to such a public event, but they didn't know the full picture. Anthony was watching them through hidden cameras and men disguised as hotel staff. Everything was being tracked. Emily, too, was prepared. She wore a hidden earpiece and knew where every guard was stationed. At one point in the evening, Anthony leaned toward Emily and said it was time. He turned and told his mother he needed to step outside for a phone call. Then he walked away slowly, disappearing into a hallway. Emily was now standing alone near the edge of the ballroom. Her heart was racing, but she kept a calm expression. People continued to laugh and talk around her, unaware of the tension. Minutes later, she noticed Vincent approaching from across the room. He didn't move too fast. He acted like an old friend coming to greet her. As he got closer, he gave a friendly smile and spoke in a soft voice, asking if she remembered him. Emily nodded slowly, playing along. He told her they needed to talk just for a minute, away from the crowd. She hesitated, looking nervous on purpose, exactly as she had been trained. This was the moment they had planned for. Vincent gently touched her arm and guided her toward the large terrace connected to the ballroom. The cool air outside made Emily shiver, but she didn't say anything. She looked over the balcony and pretended to be unsure. Behind her, Joey and Sal quietly closed the terrace doors and stood in front of them, blocking the exit. Emily glanced around, pretending to be confused and scared. Vincent spoke softly again, trying to sound kind. He told her they weren't going to hurt her, but they needed her cooperation. He said things would go easier if she just followed them. Emily didn't answer. She kept her hands at her sides, waiting for the signal. Scar hadn't appeared yet, but she knew he was nearby. Vincent began to reach into his jacket, probably for something to scare her, a picture, a weapon, a threat. That's when everything changed. The trap was ready to spring. Suddenly the terrace doors burst open. Dozens of men rushed in, shouting commands and pulling out weapons. They surrounded the area with speed and precision. The guards were dressed in suits, just like the guests, but now they moved with clear purpose. Anthony's security team had been hiding in plain sight the whole night. Vincent, Joey, and Sal froze. They raised their hands slowly, realizing they had been set up. A man grabbed Vincent and forced him to the ground. Another took Joey's gun before he could react. Sal tried to run but was quickly tackled. Emily stepped back as more guards secured the area. She saw Anthony walk calmly onto the terrace, his hands in his pockets. He looked directly at Scar, who was now standing near the ballroom doors, surrounded. Scar didn't fight. He looked at Anthony with a cold stare, knowing they had lost. The trap had worked perfectly. Inside the ballroom, the music had stopped. Guests were confused, whispering, and trying to understand what was happening. Some began to leave quietly, while others watched from a distance. Anthony stood beside Emily, who was still catching her breath. He nodded once to his men, who began removing the conspirators from the building. Scar and his team didn't resist. They knew it was over. Anthony's plan had been clean and precise. Emily looked around, still processing what had just happened. She realized the ballroom wasn't just a party. It had been a stage. Every detail, from her dress to the lighting, had been part of the setup. Anthony turned to her and said, "It's done." Emily didn't know if he meant tonight or something bigger, but she nodded. Her part was finished, for now. The Belmont charity ball had become a trap, and the enemy had walked straight into it without knowing they were being watched the entire time. Several weeks had passed since the night of the charity ball. Life in the city continued, but something had clearly changed beneath the surface. Harper's Diner, once an old, quiet place with peeling paint and wobbly chairs, now looked completely different. The walls were freshly painted, the booths replaced, and the kitchen updated with new equipment. It had reopened with little fanfare, but people noticed. Regular customers returned, impressed by the upgrades. What they didn't know was that the money behind the renovation came directly from the Romano family. Emily stood behind the counter in her new uniform. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. Her presence there meant something. People greeted her with more respect. Some whispered about her connection to Anthony Romano, though no one said it aloud. Emily knew exactly what had happened and why. Harper's was no longer just a diner. It was a symbol of power, protection, and silent control. Emily had changed too. Before all of this, she walked through the diner unnoticed. She served coffee, cleaned tables, and went home. Now, she was treated differently by almost everyone. The staff looked to her for guidance, even though she didn't have an official title. Anthony's men checked in regularly, sometimes sitting quietly in the back booth, making sure everything was safe. One afternoon, Anthony arrived with his mother, just like he had done weeks ago. He sat at the same table where everything had started. Emily brought them tea without being asked. She wasn't nervous anymore. She stood confidently, understanding exactly who she had become. Anthony told her that the threats were gone. Scar, Vincent, Joey, and Sal had all been dealt with. The danger had passed for now. He said her loyalty had saved lives. That was why Harper's was rebuilt. And that was why she was being given something more important than money or thanks. Anthony reached into his coat pocket and took out a small velvet box. He handed it to Emily without any dramatic words. Inside was a ring. It was silver, simple, but had a detailed crest carved into the top, the Romano family symbol. Emily held it carefully. She knew what it meant even before Anthony explained. This wasn't a gift. It was a sign. It meant she was part of the family now, not by blood, but by loyalty. Anthony told her the ring came with both benefits and responsibilities. Wearing it would offer her protection, but it also meant she was never truly free again. She would always be part of this world, whether she wanted to or not. Emily nodded slowly. She didn't smile. She just accepted it for what it was. Her life had changed in ways she never imagined. That quiet girl from before didn't exist anymore. She had made her choice. Later that same evening, the diner was closed to the public. Only a few people remained inside. Anthony, his mother, 2 guards near the door, and Emily. They shared a quiet dinner, nothing fancy, just food and conversation. It felt peaceful. At the end of the meal, Anthony raised his glass for a toast. Emily followed his lead. His mother looked at Emily and smiled, then used sign language to say, "Thank you." Emily responded using the sign she remembered from school. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The moment was simple, yet powerful. Anthony watched silently, proud. The woman who had once been just a waitress had now become someone trusted, someone they included at their table. Emily looked around the room that had once been her whole world. Now it was just one part of something much bigger. The toast wasn't just a celebration. It was a final, quiet agreement between them. After the toast, Emily stepped outside for some air. The street was quiet. A few people walked past without paying attention. She looked up at the diner's new sign. It still said Harper's, but now it meant something else. It was hers as much as anyone's. She touched the ring on her finger, feeling its weight. It was more than metal. It was a reminder. From this point forward, she could not return to her old life. She couldn't be just Emily the waitress again. She had seen too much, done too much, and proven herself in a world where very few people survive. She didn't know what the future would bring. There would be more challenges, more secrets. But she also knew she wouldn't face them alone. The Romano family had made their decision, and so had she. Being part of the family was permanent. There was no halfway. She was in completely. Back inside, Anthony's mother reached out and gently touched Emily's hand again. Her eyes were kind, but full of understanding. Emily smiled politely and returned to clearing the table. It was quiet again, just like the old days, but nothing was the same. Anthony stood, ready to leave, and gave her a nod of approval. No more instructions were needed. Everything between them was understood now. Emily placed the glasses in the sink, removed her apron, and looked around the diner one more time. The lights, the colors, the silence, it all belonged to a new chapter of her life. She picked up her ringed hand, looked at it, and closed her fist. A simple sign of acceptance. She walked to the back, where Anthony and his mother waited at the door. Together they raised their glasses again, quietly repeating the respectful signs they had shared. Emily knew exactly what it meant now. There was no turning back. And that's a wrap. I'm so glad you stayed with us all the way to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the story and tell us which part you liked the most or the least. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. See you in the next one.